I hosted the first Thanksgiving in 2 years to stitch my family back together, and by dessert my own child asked me, "When do you finally die, so we all get the inheritance?" A week later, I invited them back, telling them I was going to give everything to them that night. Then I made them show the world exactly who they were as they begged for the inheritance. Before we dive deeper, don't forget to subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're tuning in from. I am 70 years old, a grandfather, and my name is Arthur Hale. If you had met me before Marianne died, you would have known me as the soft-spoken principal with the corny bow ties who shook every hand at the school gates. You would have seen a man who believed in second chances and who could not pass a library without walking in as though the building itself were an old friend. After she was gone, silence took on weight. It settled in my bones. There were days that I spoke only to a kettle and a clock. 2 years passed like that, 2 Thanksgivings spent with the television murmuring and the empty chairs around my table holding their own ghostly conversations. I told myself that grief was a slow river and that my son and daughter were simply letting the current carry them where they needed to go. I told myself that time heals. What I did not tell myself was that time can rot, too. This year I decided to stop pretending the river knew where it was going. I called my son, Daniel, and my daughter, Lila. I told them, bring the families, bring the grandchildren, bring whoever they wished. I would cook the turkey with sage and orange peel the way Marianne had perfected. There would be 2 pies, pumpkin and pecan, because the great debate in our house was never settled. I sent a group message inviting them to a Thanksgiving 2 years in the making. The little typing bubbles popped up and disappeared. Finally, the replies came. "Sure, Dad. Sounds good." That was all. No exclamation points. No questions about what to bring. Just 2 flat stones thrown into a deep well. I began preparing anyway. The day before, I polished Marianne's silver. Each fork and spoon reflected my face with a little less clarity than the last, as if I were dissolving slowly. I ironed the tablecloth she had embroidered with red leaves one October long past when the children were small and believed the table came alive if you traced the pattern with your finger. I brought down the good china from its shelf, washing each plate as if I were bathing a newborn. When I opened the spice drawer, I found a note in her handwriting on a curling index card, "Save the drippings." She had drawn a smiley face next to the words, and that small smiling dot knocked me back in my chair. I stood in the kitchen and breathed until the ache receded into something human. By 4 o'clock on Thanksgiving, the house smelled like butter and rosemary and heat. I had put on a navy sweater she had loved, the one she said made me look like the first day of winter. When the doorbell rang, I set down the carving knife and rehearsed a smile in the oven glass before I opened the door. "Grandpa." My granddaughter, June, barreled into me with the sweet weight of 9 years old. Her brother, Matthew, followed at a dignified walk, already 11 and already learning to hide his joy. Their mother, Lila, stepped inside with a glance past me, as if she were checking whether the living room had changed itself while she was gone. She wore a soft gray dress and an expression I could not quite read. Behind them came Trevor, her husband, balancing a bottle of Pinot Noir and a phone that did not leave his hand. "Looks nice, Dad," Lila said without looking at anything for long. "Smells like a magazine," Trevor added. "What is that, Sage?" "It is Marianne," I said. "In a pan." They were a cascade of coats and boots and the sound of the grandchildren's voices. For a moment the house breathed again. Daniel arrived 15 minutes later with his wife, Paige, and their daughter, Sadie, who had just turned 6 and declared herself very brave about pumpkin pie. Daniel swept in with a hug that landed on my shoulders like a performance. He had always been handsome, always the child who caught the light when he entered a room. In his 40s it had turned into a certain sleekness, the kind business cards like to sit beside. He put a hand on my back and said, "Big event, Dad," as if the table were a conference room. Paige kissed the air near my cheek and made a beeline for the wine. Sadie whispered that my sweater looked like a blueberry and then hid behind Paige's skirt. We did what families do. We assembled around the table with theatrical sighs. We traded the safe updates. Work is busy. School is fine. Travel is expensive. The word mom hung there like a chandelier. Everyone pretended not to notice. To force the air to move, I asked each grandchild to say the best thing that had happened to them that month. They spoke about school projects, soccer goals, the dog who had learned to shake. I listened like a man at a well, cupping my hands and drinking as if the water were scarce. When Grace came, I spoke her name. For Marianne, I said, and then I said, for the way she taught us to pay attention. I meant the way she found the only green leaf on an autumn branch and held it up like a miracle. I meant the way she could sit with a frightened child for an hour and convince them that reading was not a wall but a tunnel. I carved the turkey. I told the grandchildren the story of the time Marianne burned the rolls so thoroughly that the smoke alarm started crying and we had to eat in the yard like an adventure, wrapped in blankets, the rolls like black stones in a basket. The children laughed. Daniel smiled but did not look at me. Lila raised her glass to no one. Trevor checked his phone under the table and smiled at it like a person. The first laugh at me came sharp and pretty during the story of the ruined roll night. "You are doing the thing again, Dad," Lila said. "You make the past sound better because you cannot stand the present." Trevor chuckled, looking up from his screen. "Nostalgia is a disease, Art. It coats everything in maple syrup." "I like maple syrup," said June. "It is not a disease," I said without heat. "It is how the brain says, do not throw away what kept you alive." That is a little dramatic. Daniel reached for more potatoes. "We are just talking about bread." "You are just talking about bread," I said. "I am talking about her." "He means Marianne," Paige stage whispered to Sadie, who nodded as if she had suspected as much. The second laugh came when I handed Daniel the bowl of cranberry sauce that Marianne had prepared every year from scratch, tasting, adding orange zest, tasting again, until she had coaxed tartness and sweetness into truce. "Store-bought is fine, Dad," Daniel said, spooning it on his plate without looking. "We do not need the whole performance." "It is not a performance," I said. "It is remembering." Paige smiled with her teeth and said, "We remember in different ways." "I remember that you made a big speech at her memorial about how she introduced you to the poems in the bathroom," Lila said to Daniel. "And then you sold her books for $1 a box." "Because no one reads bathroom poems," Daniel replied, shrugging. "It is a thing for old people who like dust." "Your mother dusted with the school janitor's rag when the budget was cut and she kept the classrooms open by herself for 3 weeks, I said before I could stop myself. "Here we go," Trevor muttered. "Saint Marianne protecting the chalk." I heard the fork touch the plate. I experienced it as a small bell, right before an avalanche. "Trevor," I said, and my voice came out as if I had borrowed it from a stranger. "What?" He held up his hands. "She had a good heart. That is not in dispute. But Daniel is right. We do not need to pretend that hand-pressed cranberry sauce is sacred scripture. We are just having dinner." "We are not," Lila said, and she laughed, a little bright sound that startled me with its cruelty. "We are watching Dad turn a meal into a museum exhibit." I do not want a museum, I said. I want my family to be kind to the dead. Dad, Daniel said, exasperation slipping through the practiced tone. We are being kind. We showed up. We are here. Physically, I said. Emotionally, too, he said. Just not in the way you want. Something in me wanted to stand, to raise my glass, to make the speech I had held in my mouth for 2 years. I wanted to say, you did not call. I wanted to say, you left her name like a coat you no longer needed. I wanted to say, you came today with your phones already on, ready to record your own faces. Instead I passed the rolls. By the time pie arrived, the grandchildren were restless. The first sugar had drained away, leaving them soft and edgy. Lila put her hand on June's shoulder to still a drumbeat on the chair. Paige asked Sadie to whisper a secret in her ear, and Sadie whispered too loudly, I do not have a secret, and then giggled as if she had invented a joke. No one spoke for a moment, the quiet of a room that has inhaled and is deciding whether to exhale as laughter or shouting. Then Daniel smiled, it was the smile he used with clients in photographs, and said lightly, all right, Dad. Enough with gravitas. Serious question. All right, I said. When do you finally die, so we all get the inheritance? He said it like a joke a person says to show that they are not joking. The room tilted, as if I were a man who had stood too fast. Paige laughed, a sound like a glass being tapped. Trevor barked. Lila pressed her lips together to hold back a smile and failed. I heard the clock in the hall over their voices. I heard the radiators clicking as they tried to keep up with November. June asked what inheritance meant, and Lila told her it was presents that take a long time to arrive. Sadie asked if she would get a pony then, and Paige said possibly. I set my fork down. It was such a small motion, the fork's tiny weight returning to its plate. That is what I remember. The spoon for the pecan pie stood in the pan like a shovel in a grave. The part of me that had been principal for 3 decades wanted to say, that was unkind and we do not talk like that in my house. The part of me that had slept in a bed alone for 2 years and woke some mornings with my hand reaching for a ghost wanted to bow my head. What I did was study my son's face for as long as it took his laughter to die on his teeth. The truth rose like a bubble of air trapped under deep water. I had taught my children to make me the resource and the apology. I had made myself into a bank with a beating heart. I rose to clear plates. No one stopped me. The room resumed its conversations in small bright threads, and I let them fray. After they left, the house opened its mouth and swallowed me inside the old familiar dark. I washed the plates slowly, as if time had agreed to move at a decent pace only because my hands were submerged. I dried the silver and returned it to its velvet nest. I folded the embroidered tablecloth over the back of a chair and left it there, as if it could learn something by spending the night upright. Then I sat at the table in my navy sweater and listened to the clock. All decisions sound different at night. The ones you make in anger are shaped like blades. The ones you make in grief are shaped like stones. The one I made was shaped like a door. I would open it and walk through. I did not sleep. Instead, I began to sort the small moments that had led here, like a boy sorting marbles by color, surprised to find how many of one shade he has collected without noticing. There was the day after Marianne's funeral when Daniel asked me for a loan to put down on an electric car and I said yes because he said yes to the world so rarely that I wanted to be a part of any yes he spoke. He never paid me back, and then he sold the car 6 months later because he said the color made him invisible on the highway. He said it with a laugh, as if being invisible were amusing. I had thought, I am invisible too. There was the afternoon Lila had brought the children by, and the first thing she did was open the fridge and remove the container labeled for soup and throw it away because she said it made her anxious to see leftovers. She said it smiling, as if anxiety were a personality trait she wore like a sweater. When I said Marianne saved soup bones for broth, Lila said, "Well, Mom also saved rubber bands," and then she kissed my cheek lightly, like a band-aid that would not stick. I of course had fished the generous bones out of the garbage later that night and returned them to the freezer, and they warmed the house in January. I had not forgotten that I had done so quietly, as if I were hiding a habit. There were dozens more. The way Trevor laughed at the idea of a library fine as if it were a joke from a world that no longer existed. The way Paige told me at Christmas that she had donated 3 of Marianne's hand-knit scarves because she read that it is unhealthy to keep relics. The way Daniel had introduced me to his friends as the funding during a toast that he thought was funny enough to repeat. The way Lila once teased me, in front of the children, for writing Marianne's name on a cardboard box in the pantry above the open shelves, a box that held the cards and letters from those first terrible weeks. She had said, "You are labeling grief, like it was a category on a spreadsheet." I had not corrected them. I had always believed in the long game, the upper hand that patience gives a man. I had confused patience with permission. At 8 o'clock the next morning, I made an appointment with a man named Victor Serrano, an estate attorney I had known from school board fundraisers when Marianne invited me along. His office smelled like paper and sunlight. He kept a ceramic bowl of peppermints on the corner of his desk and a cactus in the window shaped like a hand asserting itself. "How can I help you, Arthur?" he said, when he had finished with the kindness people use as a bridge to the real question. "I want to rewrite my will," I said. "Completely." He was quiet for long enough that I knew he was a good lawyer. Finally he said, "Do you want to tell me why?" "No," I said, and then I did. I told him about the Thanksgiving, and I told him about the slow parade of smaller things that had led me there. I told him about Marianne. I told him she had been the kind of woman who found a way to give a book to every child at the winter break and who hid a pack of cookies in her desk for the ones who needed a little softness with their sugar. I told him she would not have stood for her name being used as kindling. "I would like to give everything to local schools," I said. "After I die. All of it. The house, the accounts, the investment that did well because I held on when others did not. I want funds for the libraries. I want a scholarship for any student whose family eats saltine crackers for dinner sometimes. I want gym shoes that fit. I want a music teacher who stays. I want desks that do not wobble." Victor nodded, and his eyes shifted from the man sitting in front of him to the paper on his desk that would hold my intention. He asked questions that were neither intrusive nor polite, which is to say he asked the right ones. Did I have any wishes about how the funds should be used beyond what I had said? Did I want my name on anything? Did I want notice sent to my children now or later? Did I want to include any notes that would explain my choices to future readers? He did not say, "Are you sure you want to cut them out?" He did not say, "You will change your mind." He said, "Let us do it correctly." Marianne would have respected this, I said, because I needed to say it out loud to someone who had known her without loving her and would hear the difference. She would have said, "Arthur, you are doing the first job again. You are taking care of children." She would have been proud, he said. We drafted. He included a no-contest clause that would penalize anyone who challenged the will. He provided for a modest trust fund for the grandchildren's education that their parents could not touch, a detail he suggested and that made me grateful enough to look out the window until my eyes stopped stinging. He wrote the words "the Marianne Hale Literacy Fund" with steady ink. He arranged for witnesses and a notary who arrived with the quiet efficiency of people who make other people's lives possible. When the new will was signed, the ink drying like a small sail catching wind, Victor asked, "Do you want to tell your family now?" "I do," I said. "But I am going to do it my way." "How is that?" "I am going to invite them to dinner," I said. "I am going to tell them I am giving them everything right now. And then I am going to give them the truth." "Arthur," he said carefully, "you will want to be careful about recording anyone without their consent." "I know the law," I said. "I also know people. If I say I am filming a gifting ceremony for the school foundation, they will not object. They will want to be seen smiling." Victor looked at me for a long moment and then said, "Do what you need to do, but protect yourself." "I am done being unprotected," I said. The second dinner took place the following Friday. I kept it small on purpose, no grandchildren. I told them I had an announcement that would be boring to the little ones, but that it would affect all of them for the better. I told them to dress nicely. I reserved a private room at the community center where Mary Ann had once run a poetry night that half the town pretended to dislike and then showed up for without admitting it. I hired a videographer who had filmed our school plays back in the day, a man named Kent whose hair had become snow and whose laugh could set a room at ease. I told him this was a donor announcement that would help our local schools. He asked no questions. He brought lights that made the room look like an honest version of a dream. I placed a small sign at the door that said, "Recording in progress," and under it, with my own handwriting in thick marker, I added, "Thank you for helping kids." Daniel was the first to arrive, smelling like cologne and money. Paige floated after him like a silk ribbon. Lila and Trevor arrived on time, Lila's eyes taking in the camera and adding 5 degrees of warmth to her smile at once. They all kissed my cheeks. They complimented the choice of venue. They asked performative questions about the lighting. They posed for the camera before I asked them to. The videographer asked them to give consent for the recording, and they signed without reading. "Dad," Daniel said, clapping me on the back, "look at you. A man with a plan." I looked at him and said nothing I would regret. I stood at the front of the room with a small wooden lectern that had survived 1,000 school board meetings and said, "Thank you for coming. This is the kind of night your mother loved, Lila and Daniel. She believed in telling the truth in public." "Cheers to Mom," Lila said, lifting a glass. "Cheers to Mom," echoed the others. I let the echo die. "You are here," I said, "because I want to talk about everything I own." Daniel's face brightened a fraction, an involuntary sunrise. Paige's hand found his wrist and rested there like an evaluation. Trevor nodded to himself as if a prediction had been confirmed. Lila stared, eyes glassy with anticipation she pretended was emotion. "I gathered you because I plan to give it all away," I said. "Tonight." Paige exhaled audibly through her nose, a little laugh she could pretend was a sigh of joy. Lila said, "Dad," in a tone that made the words sound like a bubble rising through champagne. Daniel looked at me with an expression that felt like déjà vu. I had seen him smile that way as a boy when he received something he had not earned and believed that this was proof he was worthy. "I am sorry the children are not here," Paige said. "It would be special for them." "It is not for children," I said. "It is for adults who know what they are hearing." Trevor adjusted his tie out of habit, though he was not wearing one. The camera light warmed our faces with its steady, unblinking attention. "I signed a new will," I said. "Everything goes to our local schools after I die. The house, the accounts, the investments, the boat I used to talk about taking out and never did. I have set aside education trusts for the grandchildren that you cannot access or alter. That is all. The silence that followed did not feel like absence. It felt like something heavy being lifted so slowly that you see the groove it had made in the floor beneath it. Daniel laughed first, but it was not a laugh. It was a cough wrapped in a joke. "Come on, Dad," he said. "Do not be dramatic. We know you like your surprises." "I am not being dramatic," I said. "I am being precise." "Why would you do that?" Paige said, the smile disappearing from her mouth like chalk wiped off a board. "That is a cruel way to put it, Art. After all the years." "I did not ask you to count years," I said, and I kept my voice even. "Dad," Lila said, moving toward me a step, her hand extended like a peace offering that had cost her nothing. "If this is about Thanksgiving." "It is about 1,000 things," I said. "It is about the way you laughed when Trevor said that libraries are for old people. It is about the way Paige donated your mother's scarves without asking. It is about the way you opened my refrigerator and threw away the bones for soup. It is about Daniel asking me when I am going to die so that you all can have what I worked for. It is about the way you have been counting my breaths as if they were coins in a jar." "That was a joke," Daniel said, but his voice had lost its polish. "The children will never see a penny, then?" Paige demanded. "Is that what you are saying? You will starve your grandchildren to feed a building?" "There are education trusts," I repeated. "They will be educated. The rest will make sure that other children who never had a chance will have one." "What about us?" Trevor said, finally putting a name to the thing in the room that had been there since the camera came on. I looked at him. "You," I said carefully, "will be fine." Lila's eyes sharpened. "Are you punishing us?" "I am protecting something," I said. "I am protecting your mother's name from being used as a punchline. I am protecting the part of me that would have let you turn my home into a purse. I am protecting the small boy who still lives in this old body and who thinks a table with candles and grace means something. I am protecting the truth." "The truth is that you are being vindictive," Paige said. "You want to embarrass us." "The camera is here because I did not trust your word," I said. "After this night, if you say publicly that I robbed you of what you deserve, the world will have a record of what you believed you deserved and why I chose something else." "And if we refuse to be recorded?" Daniel said, finally seeing the trap and trying to edge away from it with dignity. "You cannot." "You consented," I said, and the videographer raised the clipboard almost apologetically. "But you can leave now if you like. The door works both ways." No one moved toward the door. "Say something decent about Mom," I said suddenly, surprising even myself with the request. "On camera." They stared at me, and the camera stared too. The lights hummed. "Say her name," I said. Lila spoke first, forced. "Mom loved books." "Say it like you remember the smell of them," I said. "She smelled like cinnamon sometimes," Daniel said quietly, and his voice was a boy's for a second. "When she made toast." Paige said nothing. Trevor cleared his throat and said, "She brought leftover pizza to the custodians when she stayed late. And because it is impossible to stay in the worst of yourself without a break, I let myself feel that small unanticipated grace." The camera recorded their faces softening. It recorded their worst faces, too, when Lila asked about the value of the education trusts and Daniel asked me whether there was any scenario in which I would reconsider. "There is not," I said. "You always said family first," he said. "I did," I said. "And I meant it." But family is not a group of people counting backward from your last breath. Family is the people who carry your stories without mocking them. Family is whoever keeps your name clean when you cannot speak. You are disbanding us, Lila said, and she said it like a person naming a weather event. I said. I am drawing a line. We will communicate, if we must, through Victor's office. You will not come to my house without an invitation. You will not involve the children in adult grievances. If you do, I will take further legal action and I will feel no guilt about obtaining whatever paper I need to give that feeling steel. My lawyer will send you letters that say this in a language you will not be able to pretend you did not understand. Paige stood. This is cruel, she said. You are choosing strangers over your blood. I am choosing children, I said. Which is what your mother taught me to do when she was alive, and what she would expect of me now. Daniel's face did a complicated thing. He wanted to be angry and he wanted to be ashamed, and he chose anger because it keeps a person warmer. You are going to die alone, he said. No one dies accompanied, I said. We go where we go the way we came, one at a time. The work we do while we are here is what keeps our voices in the room after we leave. I am making sure that the voice that remains for me is not a punchline. I thanked them for coming. I shook their hands the way I had shaken 1,000 hands at the school doors, gently, as if the skin were a page. They left in a rush of expensive fabric and brittle greetings. The videographer packed up his lights and looked at me for a long moment, and then he said, "She would have liked this," and I had to sit down suddenly, as if the floor had tilted toward me. The letters went out on Monday. Victor sent them by certified mail. They said exactly what I had said, but in a language that falls from a higher shelf. Lila called twice and left 2 messages that were almost nice and then finally not nice at all. Daniel sent an email that tried to sound lawyerly and failed. Paige posted a photograph of their family on social media with a caption about chosen families, and then she deleted it when she saw that the videographer had posted my announcement with the school foundation's permission and a caption about legacy. The comments were kind. Several teachers wrote about the way Marianne had filled her pockets with pencils so that no child would have to ask twice. A retired custodian wrote that she had been the only person to know his mother's name and to say it correctly the first time. There were ugly messages, too. I collected them in a folder labeled January Bouquets, a private joke I allowed myself because it did not break my rule about no mockery. When I had collected enough, I printed them and placed them in the cardboard box in the pantry with Marianne's cards. If the box ever became heavy with hate, I would carry it out to the bin myself and listen to it land. When I pictured it, I pictured a flock of black birds rising and keeping their distance. The grandchildren were protected by law and by my stubbornness. Their education trusts were created in a way that kept them above the reach of angry hands. I wrote each child a letter. I did not use the words money or will. I wrote instead, "This is a ticket with your name on it. You may use it to go somewhere good. If you need help reading the map, ask a librarian. They know all the good roads." In the days that followed, I returned to the school where Marianne had once worked. I spoke with the current principal about the fund. We stood in the library she had fought to keep open, and I put my hand on the edge of the table where she had signed countless permission slips and calmed 1,000 small panics. The principal showed me the corner they planned to paint and the shelves they planned to replace and the basket where students placed notes for the librarian when they were too shy to ask for a book. Someone had written, "Please, a story about a girl who gets free." Someone else had written, "Do you have a book with a dog that dies but not too sad?" I put my palm over those notes as if I were blessing them and laughed quietly at the audacity of the second one. "It is not tidy." What came next? Lila and I did not reconcile with a music swell. Daniel did not come to my door with a cake and a promise to be better. Paige did not send an apology. Trevor did not refold the idea of family and put it in his pocket carefully. I did not suddenly become lighter. Loss is not a coat you take off and hang on a hook. It is whether you learn. There were mornings I woke up furious and had no one to tell except a kettle and a clock, and those were old companions by now. There were Sundays when I did not go to church because I did not want to sit in a room with faces that would try to tell me that I had done the right thing and that right things are always things that feel clean. There were afternoons when I walked by the lake and said Marianne's name into the wind just to remember how it felt to be listened to by someone who knows your voice before you speak. But there were also new soundtracks. A week after the announcement, the 5th grade sent a video of themselves in the library whispering thank yous so that the librarian would not shush them. A 1st grade teacher sent me a photograph of 24 small pairs of feet in new gym shoes like a field of flowers that had agreed to be quiet for the picture. A high school senior wrote a thank you letter in tight looping handwriting saying that she had been accepted to a state university and that the scholarship fund had lifted a fear off her like a backpack she did not know she had been wearing for years. I took these as the honest ledger of my choice. The last time I saw Daniel in person was a month after the dinner. He was coming out of the coffee shop on Main Street as I was going in. We both paused as people do when they are about to be measured by a yardstick neither of them chose. He said, "Dad," and I said, "Son," and it sounded like two men practicing a language they had let go and used for too long. "You could have talked to us first," he said. "You ambushed us." "I tried to talk to you for 2 years," I said. "You answered with a silence and a calculator." He looked away toward a car idling as if he wanted a witness that would not have an opinion. "We were joking," he said finally, reaching for the most forgivable version of himself. "You were weighing my death on a kitchen scale," I said. "It is the same measurement no matter what you call it." He lifted his shoulders and dropped them, a physical shrug that made him look like a boy caught taking a cookie and pretending the jar had fallen into his hand. "Enjoy your schools," he said, and he walked away. "I will," I said, but he did not hear me. On the first anniversary of the new will, I walked to the school where the Literacy Fund had purchased a set of books that let children read the world to themselves. The librarian, a woman with tired eyes and bright earrings, put a hand on my arm and said, "We were going to call the room the reading room, but instead we called it Marianne's room, if that is all right," and I had to steady myself on the edge of a shelf. "It is more than all right," I said. I went home and cooked a small dinner for myself. I did not set the table with the embroidered cloth. I used a placemat Marianne liked that had a picture of lemons in an old bowl. I ate slowly, and when I was done, I washed the plate and turned the kettle on and poured the hot water over a tea bag that released bergamot like a secret. I stood at the sink and listened to the wind be busy with the maple in the yard. I said out loud, "We did our job," and by we I meant Marianne and me, and by job I meant the quiet obligation we had always shared to leave the place a little kinder than we found it. I lost my family, that is one truth. I protected the truth in my late wife's name, that is another. People who love tidy stories will want to know which truth is heavier. I do not weigh them. I carry both and walk, and most days that is enough. On the days that it is not, I pour tea and say, "Save the drippings," and I remember that wisdom sometimes shows up on curling index cards in drawers you never thought to open, and sometimes it shows up in the voice of a man who finally put down a fork and decided not to pick it back up until he could trust his hands again.
Hello everyone, and thank you for watching. I truly hope you enjoyed listening to this story as much as I enjoyed creating it. If you did, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel to help support the creation of more stories like this. Have a great day or evening.